The room was cold, colder than death itself. His fingers, once warm with life, were now brittle, darkened by the creeping grasp of frostbite. His lips parted, but no screams came out. His body shuddered violently as icy waters continued to claim his flesh. Around him, men in pristine white coats scribbled notes with detached precision. Their voices, flat and clinical, carried no trace of empathy. To them, he wasn't a person, he was an experiment, a number, a tool. This was not a battlefield, nor was it a hospital. This was Unit 731, a secretive institution of Imperial Japan, responsible for some of the most horrifying atrocities of World War II. But what was Unit 731, and why has it remained one of history's most terrifying secrets? It's a question that has puzzled historians and experts alike, and today we will try to solve it. So let's dive in. The rise of Unit 731 can be traced back to one man, Shiro Ishii, a microbiologist with boundless ambition and no ethical restraints. Ishii saw biological warfare as the future of military supremacy. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a strategist, a man who understood that disease could be deadlier than any bullet or bomb. By the early 1930s, he convinced Japan's military elite that biological weapons would secure Japan's dominance over Asia. And in 1936, his vision became reality. Unit 731 was born, under the guise of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Unit 731's headquarters was constructed in Harbin, China, far from prying eyes. The compound spanned 6 square kilometers and housed laboratories, prison cells, crematoriums and even an airfield. But this was no ordinary research facility. Here, prisoners, men, women and even children were stripped of their humanity. They were not called patients, not even prisoners. They were referred to as logs, disposable, replaceable. From the moment they entered, their fate was sealed. No one left Unit 731 alive. Science has given humanity some of its greatest achievements. Medicine that saves lives, technology that connects the world, and knowledge that pushes us beyond our limits. But what happens when science abandons morality? When the pursuit of knowledge is placed above ethics, above human dignity, above life itself? Unit 731 is one of history's darkest answers to that question. It was a place where doctors became executioners, where curiosity became cruelty, and where human beings were reduced to nothing more than test subjects. The scientists at Unit 731 believed they were advancing medicine, pushing the boundaries of human understanding, but in reality, they were proving just how far humanity can fall when morality is stripped away. The researchers at Unit 731 didn't see themselves as murderers. They saw themselves as pioneers, men working towards a future where Japan could dominate through superior biological warfare. To them, the people they experimented on weren't victims, they were data points, living subjects to be used and discarded in the name of progress. And with that mindset, there was no limit to what they were willing to do. They justified their actions by claiming that the knowledge they gained would help Japan build the most powerful biological weapons in the world, teach soldiers how to survive extreme conditions, advance medical science in ways that could benefit future generations. But can knowledge gained through cruelty ever truly be justified? Inside Unit 731, science was stripped of ethics. The most basic principles of medicine, saving lives, relieving suffering, were completely ignored. Instead, the facility became a brutal laboratory where human endurance was pushed to its absolute limits. One of the most infamous practices at Unit 731 was vivisection, the live dissection of prisoners. Victims were infected with diseases like the plague, cholera and anthrax, then cut open without anesthesia, so doctors could study how the illnesses spread to their organs. This wasn't done out of hatred. There was no emotional attachment, no personal vendetta. It was simply procedure, a necessary step in gathering data. But that's exactly what made it so chilling. The absence of cruelty is not the same as the presence of morality. To understand how Japan's soldiers could survive in freezing conditions, prisoners were subjected to extreme cold. Some were forced to stand outside for hours in sub-zero temperatures. Others had their limbs plunged into icy waters until they could no longer feel them. When their skin froze solid, doctors would beat their limbs to see if they shattered like ice. This wasn't about survival, it was about calculation. Scientists meticulously recorded how long it took for tissue to die, how frostbite progressed, and whether limbs could be revived under different conditions. It was research, but at what cost? Unit 731 also used prisoners to test weapons, explosives and chemical agents. Some were tied to stakes and exposed to grenades, so scientists could measure the exact distance at which a human body would be torn apart. Others were locked in gas chambers inhaling poisonous substances, while researchers observed how long they could survive. Many were injected with experimental drugs to see if they could survive deadly infections, or if the treatment would kill them faster. Even blood itself was experimented on. Some prisoners had their blood completely drained, while others were injected with animal blood to see if they could survive. The answer, of course, was no. Perhaps the most horrifying part of Unit 731's research is that it didn't stay within the walls of the facility. The knowledge they gained was tested on real people in real cities. Japanese scientists deliberately infected entire villages with diseases like the bubonic plague, anthrax and cholera. Fleas carrying deadly bacteria were dropped from airplanes. Contaminated food and water supplies were introduced to civilian populations. Thousands of innocent people died, all in the name of research. Unit 731's leaders believed this was progress. But was it really? Or was it proof of how science, when stripped of ethics, becomes just another weapon of destruction? The men of Unit 731 weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They were educated, intelligent scientists. Many of them had medical degrees, had taken the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm, and yet they became the architects of some of the worst atrocities in history. This raises a terrifying question. If brilliant minds can justify such horrors once, what's to stop it from happening again? History has shown us that science is a double-edged sword. It can be used to cure diseases or to create them. It can be used to save lives or take them away. The experiments of Unit 731 serve as a warning. When we remove morality from science, we don't just lose our ethics, we lose our humanity. And if we ever forget that, history may repeat itself. The horrors of Nazi Germany are well documented. Auschwitz, Dr. Josef Mengele and the inhumane experiments carried out in the name of racial purity. But how does Unit 731 compare? At Auschwitz, Mengele's experiments focused on genetics, race and eugenics. Twins were tortured in the pursuit of Nazi ideology. In the contrast, Unit 731's work was purely militaristic. Ishii and his researchers had one goal: to weaponize disease. Both regimes conducted vivisections, chemical injections and exposure experiments. Both saw children and pregnant women as test subjects. But where Mengele's work often had no practical military application, Unit 731's research was horrifyingly functional. Their experiments directly informed Japan's biological warfare tactics. In raw numbers, Auschwitz's death toll, over 1 million, far exceeds that of Unit 731. But in sheer cold-blooded detachment, Unit 731 may be unmatched. Its victims weren't killed out of ideology or hatred. They were simply data points in an experiment. By 1945, Japan was collapsing. The war was lost, and with it, Unit 731 faced its own reckoning. As Soviet forces advanced into Manchuria, Shiro Ishii knew his operation had to disappear. He ordered the destruction of Unit 731's Harbin facility, ensuring that no physical evidence would remain. Documents were burned. Prisoners, those who hadn't already been experimented on, were executed. Any remaining biological weapons were destroyed or buried. But while Japan was desperate to erase Unit 731, two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, saw an opportunity. Unit 731 had conducted experiments that no Western scientists would have dared to attempt. And in the looming Cold War, this knowledge was too valuable to ignore. Instead of prosecuting wwII and his men, the United States granted them immunity in exchange for their research. So what knowledge did the US gain? Human testing on biological weapons. Unlike Nazi experiments, Unit 731 had tested biological weapons directly on humans, providing real-world data on the lethality of anthrax, plague, cholera and botulinum toxins. US scientists lacking such human data were eager to study their findings. Flea-based plague bombs. Unit 731 had developed ceramic bombs filled with plague-infected fleas, designed to spread the disease in enemy territory. The US military took interest in these delivery methods, using them to inform their own bioweapons program at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Frostbite and extreme temperature data. The United States gained extensive data from Unit 731's frostbite experiments, influencing military survival training for the Korean War and Arctic conditions. Aerosolized pathogens and inhalation studies. The United States learned how different diseases affected humans when inhaled as fine particles, aiding in the development of aerosol-based biological weapons. Psychological and physiological effects of torture. Some reports suggest US intelligence agencies studied Unit 731's findings on pain tolerance, which may have contributed to later Cold War era interrogation methods. In return for these insights, wwII and his top researchers were never tried as war criminals. Instead, many of them were absorbed into post-war Japanese research institutions, pharmaceutical companies, and even government positions. The US, still reeling from Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, justified the deal under the premise that the Soviets would get the information if we didn't. Unlike the United States, the Soviets did prosecute some Unit 731 scientists. In 1949, the Khabarovsk war crime trials were held, where 12 members of Unit 731 were sentenced to labor camps. But justice was not the true objective. The Soviet Union too wanted Unit 731's research. So what knowledge did the Soviets gain? Mass infection techniques. The Soviet Union studied how Unit 731 had intentionally spread plague, typhus and cholera, particularly their use of infected fleas and contaminated food supplies to start epidemic outbreaks in China. Nerve gas and chemical weapons testing. Some Unit 731 scientists had also worked on nerve agents and mastered gas tests. The Soviets used these findings in the development of their own chemical warfare programs. Plague bomb development. After acquiring data on plague-infected flea bombs, the Soviets developed similar weapons in the 1950s at their secret bioweapons research facility in Sverdlovsk, which is now Yekaterinburg. Human resistance to biological agents. Soviet scientists studied how long infected humans survived and how quickly diseases spread in controlled environments. Knowledge that could be used to engineer bioweapons tailored to specific conditions. After the Khabarovsk trials, the Soviet Union absorbed several former Unit 731 scientists into its bioweapons programs. This research played a role in the expansion of Soviet bioweapons facilities like Vector, which later became one of the largest biological warfare research centers in the world. In the end, neither the US nor the Soviet Union truly sought justice. Both nations had competing biological warfare programs, and Unit 731's research gave them a head start. The Cold War turned war criminals into valuable assets, and the victims of Unit 731 were silenced by geopolitics. wwII never faced trial. He lived comfortably in post-war Japan and died of throat cancer in 1959, never once expressing remorse. Many other Unit 731 members went on to hold positions in Japan's pharmaceutical industry, research institutions, and even government roles. The atrocities they committed were buried under layers of secrecy, denial, and Cold War politics. And so, justice for the victims of Unit 731 never came. The Holocaust is taught in schools, Auschwitz is remembered, but Unit 731? Japan has never fully acknowledged the extent of Unit 731's atrocities. Unlike Germany, which has openly confronted its past, Japan has remained largely silent. Many of the scientists responsible continued their lives without consequence, without guilt, without remembrance. There are no official memorials for the victims, no survivors to tell their stories. And so, justice for the victims of Unit 731 never came. But history has a way of repeating itself when it's forgotten. Unit 731 remains a ghost, its horrors hidden in the shadows of time. And perhaps that is the most terrifying part of all. It was more than just a military research facility, it was the ultimate perversion of science, where knowledge became a weapon and human life was reduced to data. It didn't kill out of hatred, it didn't kill for ideology, it killed for the pursuit of power. And its greatest crime? It was erased from history. Perhaps the most chilling question is this: if we allow Unit 731 to be forgotten, what's to stop it from happening again? I want to thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm your host, chronicler, reminding you that history is written in mystery.